Welcome. Let's gather in and get started. I'm John Roars, the rector here. It is great to welcome you here on this rainy day, and we're in a warm place with warm people. So thank you for being here. We continue this morning our Easter season series on finding new life, where we're focusing on resurrection in the midst of the challenges of life, kind of making the resurrection real in our lives and in our world. And it is my privilege to welcome with us Jan Brown, who is a friend and colleague from the Diocese of Southern Virginia. Jan is the deacon at Bruton Parish Church in Williamsburg, and is the archdeacon of the Diocese of Southern Virginia, and is also the director of the Spirit Works Foundation, which focuses on the work and ministry of recovery and how it intersects with our spiritual lives. And so it is a privilege to welcome you here, Jan. Thank you. With that said, I want to ask sort of an opening question and turn it over to Jan, and that is just introduce yourself and tell us about yourself and about the ministry of Spirit Works, if you would.
Thank you. So my name is Jan. I introduce myself as a woman with addiction and long-term recovery, which for me means that I haven't used drugs or alcohol for the past 36 years. I'm not as young as I look. Doing so has allowed me, a life beyond my wildest dreams, one that I want to keep. In the beginning, it was about living and dying, and I didn't want to die. And so sobriety became what was necessary in order that I not die. And through the years, my recovery has evolved. It is not simply about not drinking or using. It's about what I'm able to bring to the world through the church, and certainly on the outside as in service to God. What else am I? I'm supposed to also, John was really supposed to do this, tell you why you were seated this way, right? I noted that Episcopalians don't like change, so we're going to pause and he can tell you that.
That's right. You noticed them squirming, did you? Yeah, right. So it's set up like this because yesterday we hosted two performances of a play called Every Brilliant Thing, which deals with the subject of suicide in a really tender and life-affirming way. And I know that a number of you were able to come. It's a beautiful play. If you get a chance to see, you can find it on HBO, actually, if you have access to that. But hopefully we'll get them to come back to Richmond another time. It's a traveling tour. So the show is in the round, so that's why you're situated like this today. And this that was the concluding, that and Jan being here this morning is the conclusion of our week-long focus on mental health and wellness, which of course it covers a broad spectrum from mental illness, depression, anxiety to addiction in all its forms. All of that is about our mental health, and so maybe that's a good time for me to hand it back to you. Tell us more about how that intersects with the work of Spirit Works.
Sure. So Spirit Works was founded. I founded Spirit Works 18 years ago now, and I did so in response to one too many healthcare professionals having a return to use. And so what that looked like was I was working at a treatment center that specializes, still they do, in treating healthcare and professionals who are impaired by substance use. And we had a dentist, and on Friday afternoons we sit in a circle and everyone congratulates the people for how well they've done and wishes them well as they exit. And this particular dentist drove a red pickup truck, I'll never forget. And about 4 hours after he left, his wife called me cursing. She was angry. He had gotten arrested, was in jail, had gotten a DUI. And from that experience, I chose to create Spirit Works initially as a place that would be available for people what we called on day 91. So for those who were in rehab for 90 days, we wanted to be there to be that bridge for when they left. We also kind of talked of ourselves as, what are you going to do the other 23 hours of the day when you're not in a meeting? So we actually have 2 recovery centers here in Virginia, one in Williamsburg, one in Warrenton, and we now have one on the Navajo Reservation. We have partnered with Episcopal Church Navajo Land to support the people on the reservation as well as the people who are in the community. Indigenous folks are ravaged by the disease of alcoholism, and now we're seeing methamphetamines and other drugs be introduced into the community, and they have very few resources, and so it is a privilege for us to get to work with them. We also provide peer recovery services, support services to individuals, to families, to clergy, to communities, designed to break and interrupt the cycle of addiction that someone may be experiencing. We work with children. We have a summer camp that we offer every year as part of the Province 3, of which we all are. So if you know of children, have grandchildren, it is a free week-long camp at the Claggett Center in the Diocese of Maryland. They have experts who know about camping, and I don't. So I get to come and talk with the children and youth about growing up in households with addiction and how that's affecting their lives. And many years ago when we started the camp, one of the stories that I've held on since then was asking a young boy, we drew from a bag, and I said, what is embarrassing for you? And he said he doesn't like to have his friends come over because his mother may be drunk, and that would be embarrassing for him. When I asked the question a few years ago, the young person said, I'm embarrassed because there may be pills on the floor and needles in the house, and I wouldn't want my friends to see that. So we've really shifted, though alcohol still remains the number one cause of death in terms of substances. I'm sure it's not lost on any or many of you that we are in the time of an opioid drug epidemic, and so we are really responsive and having to become more and more responsive to the needs of people, and also looking at prevention of death, again, primarily. The drug supply in this country, in Richmond, is dreadful. It is no longer, so we had what we call waves of this drug epidemic. It started, certainly we've had illicit drugs forever, but this recent thing that we've been talking about started because of overprescribing, and overprescribing medication to people who were vulnerable, right? So it's not necessarily overprescribing to everyone. I think one of the things that it caused is people to be afraid to take medication that they need. And so that is a myth. When people are taking medication as prescribed for a need, it works really well. Sadly, for some of us, that need looks like we have emotional or psychic or spiritual pain, and the medication actually works better for those types of pain. And so that was kind of phase one, when overprescribing became a problem, and we chose to do something different. People who had become dependent, people who had become addicted, still needed to take the opioids, and so they went to the streets. They went to the streets of Richmond. They went to the streets of, you name it. We will go to any streets to get drugs. And so that's when the kind of illicit drug boom came, and people started using heroin, easy to access, cheaply purchased, and so that was kind of wave 2. Then we had wave 3, which is just ending, right? So wave 3 looks like the introduction of fentanyl, which is hundreds of times stronger than heroin. It's still present. We still have fentanyl, and I'll talk a little bit about why that's such a tricky drug. Certainly there are legitimate uses of fentanyl for those who are being treated by a healthcare professional, but most of the fentanyl that we are seeing is coming from China and coming up somehow from Mexico, and so that's a tainted drug supply. People don't know what it is that they're using. We've even seen here in Richmond and in other places in Virginia, fentanyl is now being put in marijuana. And so, one of the things we talk to young people about is that one, the marijuana is stronger. We would say this is not your mother's marijuana. I guess we should say father sometime. But nonetheless, it is not marijuana of old. It's much stronger in terms of its concentration. And then add fentanyl, which is not expected to be in that. And you've got a pretty deadly cocktail. So at the end, again, fentanyl is still here, but what then came about was animal medication, right? So the first one that was introduced is carfentanil. Carfentanil is for use by people who need to help large game animals like elephants and bulls and others. It's a tranquilizer for them, right? So that somebody can perform whatever necessary medical procedure is. There is no use for human consumption, right? So carfentanil was the first one that was introduced. And now, where we are kind of phase 4, we have what's called xylazine. And xylazine is even more deadly than fentanyl, than carfentanil. It also is for animals, so there is no human need to take xylazine. And that mixture with fentanyl and heroin is what's causing and driving most of the deaths that we're seeing today. What's so difficult about that is we have what's called Narcan, which is naloxone, which is an overdose reversal medication. And it works really well on heroin and other opioids, less so on fentanyl. But if people are given multiple doses of it, we usually do okay with those reversals. Now that we have xylazine, which is not an opioid, deaths are going up again, and that is because it's a respiratory, causes respiratory depression, as does fentanyl. And so, the challenge is both of those things on board as a cocktail or mixture are leading to the deaths. In Newport News, York County, we had a 2-year-old who got into her mother's supply of xylazine last year, and it caused her death. It caused us to decide at SpiritWorks that we wanted to work with parents and pregnant people who are either entering into recovery, still using drugs, because we know that it's the generations, right? So we need to work with the individual who uses the drug. We need to work with their children, and sometimes we have a woman who had gotten out of jail, and she came to SpiritWorks. We met her when she was in jail. She came to seek recovery support services, and she had a probation officer. And so she asked if she could meet the probation officer at SpiritWorks along with her daughter and her other children. And we said, of course. So in comes, she had lots of children, like 6, I think. Maybe that's not lots, but more than 2. And they came, and the probation officer was there. And the oddest thing was that the probation officer was her probation officer, and it was also one of her daughter's probation officers. And so for me, what that became about, and her granddaughter was there. It's like, wow. So in 15 years, her granddaughter might have the same probation officer. And so that piece really inspired us to work with this population of pregnant and parenting people. We are still mostly working with pregnant and parenting women, not opposed, again, to men or dads. There's a couple of really good programs that are offered, child development resources for men. We know that, these young ones are the greatest, fastest growing population, infants, substance-exposed infants who are in foster care, and so the need is dire. When I was driving here, I saw a sign about how many people in Richmond are in foster care, and I was like, wow, I've never seen such a sign. But I thought it was really telling.
Thank you, Jan. I wonder if you could tell us, so we've been talking this week in different formats about the sort of the danger and the culture of shame and silence and stigma that often comes with mental illness, depression, and certainly addiction as well. And we're trying to think about how the church can play a role to break through that silence, to be a place where people talk about these struggles, and to be kind of communities of care and support. So I wonder what I know that Bruton has some wonderful history of doing this, and there's good history here as well. What are you seeing in ways that the church can be a part of these conversations and communities of care?
I'm going to stand up now. I'm not a sitter, and John knows, so okay. And if I have to stay in a little box area, just let me know. Okay, so a few things. I have the good fortune of teaching a seminary course at Bexley Seabury right now, where we are equipping lay leaders and clergy folk to be able to better minister to those who are within our midst. One of the things that we know is that clergy don't get a lot of education in addiction. We certainly do in pastoral care, but as John mentioned, there's so much stigma and shame and guilt that people are carrying around. And who we most often see are the family members, right? So family members are coming to us, and we're still operating on a lot of myth or personal information, our lived experience as people in recovery. And sadly, that is causing people to stay away from seeking help, and it's also causing increased deaths, because one of the things we know is that one size doesn't fit all, right? So some of us may have achieved recovery from 12-step programs, but 12-step programs aren't for everyone. And so that is a piece that we've been working really hard in the Episcopal Church, not extremely successful, to be honest, through recovery ministries of the Episcopal Church, trying to open up avenues for people to seek and achieve in recovery, and then to be able to maintain it. One of the things that has become really important to us is recognizing substance use disorder and addiction as chronic illnesses. There are people who struggle on a daily basis forever. There are people who have to take medication. And many of us, as clergy, as lay people, continue to believe that addiction is a moral failing, right? And so we've got work to do in that vein of understanding it differently. We also need to make space, to create safe spaces for folks who are in recovery. I'm going to tell on Bruton, and that's okay. They're used to me telling on them. So my office used to be on the second floor, and there's a recovery support meeting, a 12-step meeting that meets on the second floor. And to get there, you have to pass my office. I shared that particular office for a long time, and it was the office where they stored alcohol, right? And not just a little bit of alcohol, lots of alcohol. And so people, as they were making their way to the meeting, had to walk by beer and lots of alcohol. Once we educated and brought it to the attention of my mate who was sharing the office with me, of course she moved it, right? But what were we saying to those who were using our space, who we invited to use our space? We were saying that it's really not safe for you. So that's one of the pieces. I have this dream that people continue to tell me is a fantasy, and I'm okay with that, because I know God can do anything and everything. So one of my dreams is that in the Episcopal Church we talk about an equally attractive alternative beverage, right? And usually that looks like a pitcher of water or Country Time lemonade, not like the craft beers and the other things, the wines that are being served. And there's nothing wrong with people drinking safely. I can't do it, but I'm okay with others who have a healthy relationship with alcohol. My aspiration is that alcohol be the equally attractive alternative beverage, that we flip it on its head, right? Long past are the days when we talk about Whiskapalians and how many people makes a fifth and those kinds of things. Because the reality is that, you know, people back in the day talked about marijuana as the thing that caused people to use. It's actually alcohol and nicotine. And what are the most growing substances of our children? They're vaping, right? Sometimes it's nicotine, sometimes it's THC. We don't always know what's in it. And so, you know, what are we saying to them? You know, at Bruton, I remember one of my aspirations, I have lots of them, was to have one event that didn't have alcohol. One. And we do. We have the pancake supper. That's the only event at Bruton that doesn't have alcohol. And one year, Spiritworks partnered with Bruton, and we had some kind of follies or something, and we served non-alcoholic drinks for that. So that year we had 2. But again, we have a lot of work to do. Years ago, I had the good fortune of serving on the Commission on Impairment and Leadership, and that came about in the Episcopal Church because one of our former bishops had been drinking and driving and using marijuana, and she ran over a cyclist and killed him. And as a result, the Episcopal Church, as we do, made some new resolutions and created this Commission on Impairment, and we went around to some of the different dioceses, and we did like this crash report thing, so that we were looking at things that we needed to do differently in the church and things that were working in the church. Some things have come about as a result of that. Mostly we have returned to where we are. One of the things that I talk about is that our resolutions don't have teeth, right? There's no consequence if you don't follow them. And until they have some kind of teeth, we're going to continue to do the same things over and over and expect something different. One of the stories that I often tell is that Heather Cook's father, Halsey, was a priest in the Diocese of Maryland, and he was commissioned by the Episcopal Church Fund to do a study, this is probably 35, 40 years ago now, on what is happening with people who are impaired by alcohol. How much is it costing the church? And he said that it was the number one thing that is being paid for by the church pension fund, and that if we don't get a handle on it, we are going to have something catastrophic happen in the Episcopal Church. And 30 years later, it was his daughter who crashed into that cyclist. So again, lots of work to do. I did a talk maybe last week, I can't remember, not too long ago, at VCU for one of the conferences. And one of the pieces that I invited the people in recovery to do, right? We want everybody to get rid of your stigma and embrace us and all of those things, but we have stigma too, right? That shame and that guilt that we walk around with. We don't understand our own addiction as an illness. We understand it as bad behavior. We understand it as there's something wrong with me, that I should feel guilt and shame, instead of celebrating our recoveries and managing our addiction over time. And it was interesting because people kind of went along with me, and it was nice. And then there was this one lady, and she said at the end, and I welcomed her comment, she said, "My friends and I like to call each other junkies and crackheads." And I thought, really? She said, "We think it's fun and funny." And I said, "Well, how do you think we're ever going to get other people to stop calling us that if you're not willing to stop calling yourself and others that?" And so she paused. I didn't change her mind, and that's okay. I think I planted a seed. Hopefully, you know, as our brains heal from the drugs that we use, we become less self-centered and more other-centered. We become less self-centered and more God-centered. And so we're able to really, the name of my talk had something to do with we are each other's keepers, right? So I have a responsibility to someone else to pave a way for them to have the opportunity to get sober. Family members are still, and children who are family members, are the ones who continue to experience the most shame and guilt. We work with a lot of family members. As I said earlier, one of the pieces, there's a lot of myths. So one of the myths is around people have to hit rock bottom, right? Maybe some of you have heard it, maybe some of you have said it. Family members whose loved ones have died will tell you that that's rock bottom, and dead people don't recover, right? So what we need to do is to address the problem of use disorder and addiction early on and often. We're now reaching into elementary schools because that's who's being offered drugs. Kids are getting it on the bus, they're vaping, not knowing what they're vaping, so that's a huge area that we've been emphasizing. And so the other piece, right, so one of the things that many times people say, we talk a lot about the language that needs to change. And so that, I think, is a place where churches can come on board and learn the new language, or learn the correct language is actually better stated. One of the things that still is often in use is this idea that we are substance abusers, right? Some of you may have said it. Some of you may actually think so. We are not abusers because abusers are traditionally criminals, right? So if you abuse an elder or a child, or you sexually abuse someone, you are committing a crime. Use disorder is a brain issue and something that is treatable and people can recover from. In addition, and I think most importantly, is I, as a person who has addiction, never abused a drug. I loved them, right? They were my best friend. I thought about it all day. I had a primary relationship with them. I spent my money on it. I did not abuse drugs. They were everything for me until they no longer worked and my life became a train wreck. So people who are using drugs are not abusing them. The other piece, and this is one of my pet peeves, so you're just going to have to bear with it, is that babies are not born addicted, right? That's, I don't know where it comes from, but we say it, people in the field say it, and it's a dreadful thing. The reality is that it's not possible for a baby to be addicted, right? So addiction takes time. I've never seen a baby, go out and steal to buy drugs. Never seen a baby, put things aside that they need to be doing, taking care of their family, going to their jobs. Never seen a baby do that. Babies are born exposed, which can mean that their brains are dependent. And that's why some of them have to go through withdrawal. My spouse and I, it's still a good fortune, had the good fortune of a woman with use disorder coming to us last year and saying, I need help. I have a child and I can't take care of him. Would you do so? Never met this woman until I can. We said no, and then we listened to sermons and we prayed about it, and then we said yes. So we inherited he came out of the hospital. He was born at the end of January. He came out of the hospital in March. During COVID, was not allowed to have visitors, so received no human touch other than the nurses who were there caring for him. He had to be weaned from methadone because he was indeed born substance exposed. Complications from that withdrawal were because with methadone withdrawal, you need to have human touch. You need cuddlers, you need that to happen in order for a successful medical withdrawal. God is great. Somehow, a new hospital that had a NICU opened up right across the parking lot from CHKD, so they wheeled him over there, and they were able to have cuddlers, and he was able to be weaned successfully. Fast forward, gosh, we've had her for 2 weeks. His mother had another child, so Jackson has a little sister. They came to us. Thankfully, they didn't come to us when the baby was born, because I don't know that we could have said yes at that time. And we have said yes, so we now have a 15-month-old and a 4-month-old. Our 4-month-old came to us substance exposed. Her course of treatment has been different. She didn't require medication, which is good. However, I've been learning about bodily fluids that I never knew could do the things that they do. Children are sticky, and she came to us sick, so we've had her for 2.5 weeks. She's brought germs. I've never, these exams that you have to take. The good news is that we got to take her to the hospital the other day. She required an ER visit, and we have our little fancy piece of paper. So mind you, I have 2 white children, right? God can do anything. So I have this special piece of paper that I carry with me in case somebody's like, where did you get them from? And I can show you that, I am authorized to have them. And so, she's amazing and charming, and the healthcare professionals were wonderful, right? And so some of the things that we do to help the healthcare professionals are always, this is a child, so of course we would go. But if it were somebody who is a client of SpiritWorks, we go with them to the emergency room, right? We sit with them so that people in the emergency room, the healthcare professionals, can know that these are people and they're connected to somebody else, right? We know we're difficult. We know we're pains. Somebody stays with them so that it frees up the hands of those who are in the ER to help other people, because sometimes what we just need is time, right? And so that's something that's been helpful. We come back and we say thank you. A lot of healthcare professionals don't know that people can and do get well, right? Because they see the same people over and over. You may have heard the expression, frequent flyer. One of the things over the loudspeaker in some ERs, you hear Gomer. We have a Gomer. Get out of my emergency room. So those are the attitudes that sometimes we're dealing with. There's some kind of holiday all the time, right? I think Nurses Week, Hospital Week, whatever. We buy flowers. We send them cookies. We've become friends with the police officers. We invite them to our space, which still is a little scary for people, but we do it anyway because they're doing their jobs, right? A lot of folks didn't get into the fields that they're in. A friend of mine's brother is a DEA agent, and he retired because he said he didn't want to be bitter. He didn't get into this business to lock up children, right? He did, especially not his kids' friends. He didn't get into this business because he wanted to go to one more overdose of a young person. And he doesn't want to be bitter. And so this year, what we've decided to do is to celebrate and find ways to honor first responders. They're out here saving our lives, and we need to say thank you more often than we ever do.
Thank you, Jan. I'm struck by what you said about the methadone withdrawal requiring connection and touch as a part of the. I think that sort of metaphorically, that's what we've been talking about all week. Is the need to create communities of care. Maybe not we may not be actual cuddlers in the moment, but that we all can know that whatever challenges we're facing in our lives or our loved ones, that they can find communities of care to nurture folks toward health and recovery in whatever way. So we've got time for one question, maybe two quickly, and then we'll get ready for church.
John, I'd like to thank you for having this focus on mental health issues. I think very often we think about it in the abstract. I'm a pediatrician. I'm a faculty member downtown at MCV VCU. And one of my colleagues two of my colleagues have just written a paper which was published in JAMA, so it has national significance. And we rate health care in this nation by looking at mortality rates. And if you looked at mortality rates, causes of death in 1900, it was things like pneumonia, meningitis, severe dehydration due to gastrointestinal diseases in children. But if you look at the death rates in 1980 of kids, number one was automobile accidents. Infectious diseases had fallen because of immunizations. But if you look at that data today, number one, suicide. Number two, deaths from drug use. And it isn't until you get down the list that you begin to see medical things like infections in children. And in the United States, there are more deaths now from suicide than automobile accidents. In Virginia, the same. And this has a huge impact. And it's easy for us to say, well, it's downtown, it's in an urban area, it's out in the rural communities, but it isn't. It's everywhere. And so this focus was really important and should be repeated, and particularly with our kids, our grandkids. Thank you.
Real quickly, one of the things we offer, and maybe we could bring it here, it's called Hidden in Plain Sight. And we do it for parents and grandparents, and it's a teenage boy's bedroom, and it's got all kinds of things in it that people wouldn't necessarily know are related to substance use or risky behavior or folks who are suffering with mental illness. And we invite adults over 18 to come in and to kind of take a look at some of the different things that are in there so that they can learn and have a conversation. We use it as conversation starters for people to know what's in their bedroom. Most of the things that are hidden in plain sight we buy from Amazon. All right, there's things that are supposed to be containers for jewelry, and they are stash boxes. There are things that are supposed to be used for spices, and they are the ways that they cut up and ground their marijuana and other drugs. So again, it's not so that you go home and toss your children's bedroom. It's so that you start a conversation about some of the risky behavior. I mean, some of the magazines that are sitting in plain sight in their rooms.
Well, thank you. I did, just in closing, I did want to not let this hour go by without reminding you all and saying that we do have recovery groups that meet here, I believe, every night of the week, or maybe a few during the day. So that this is a church that has long supported the journey of recovery, and so want you to know, if you did not know that is part of the fabric here that will continue. And if you need to connect with one of those groups or connect to broader support in the community, please don't hesitate to speak to any of the clergy or the staff here, and we'd be glad to help point you in those directions and try to get you the care that you need, or loved ones, family members, friends, anybody in your orbits.
And John knows where to find me, so if you or anyone have any questions, please reach out to John and reach out to us at SpiritWorks. We're happy to be supportive for folks.
Thank you all very much. Thank you, Jan.